Nebula. Amid my frozen flesh and bone, icy to my core, through miles of deep, empty, black desolation, over the weight covering the lids of my eyes with heavy pressure, I begin to feel a great shift. This strangest of feelings is both within and out of my body, only prompting my soul to question if it is finally safe to breathe again. I am in a state of great weightlessness, floating in a sea of emptiness, all while the shift continues to flow throughout my being. My frozen body, in such a state since the beginning of time, feels different. I only know what I have lived, and I have no teacher to guide the newness. I see throughout the blackness of the void a spark, lodged deep within my bones. This must be what it feels like to thaw. The light twinkle from my core seeps its way through my veins, lighting my body up in the great abyss in which I have floated forever. My arms and head taste the light, drawing themselves into my legs, condensing my being into a small, intense ball. As my limbs wrap themselves around the ball I've made of myself, the light shines brighter and brighter, creating a blazing heat within me. I squeeze my body tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter, until the light reaches its height, exploding out, illuminating the darkness. I now find my spirit liberated, spread out among thousands and thousands of miles. Deep purples, pinks, greens, and blues light up the universe. Clouds of diamonds and gemstones glitter in the new light, expanding constantly. I feel my soul replenished, redeemed from an eternity of meaningless stillness. This space is now brightened with 1,000 suns, 1,000,000 moons, and an endless cluster of nebulae, the most beautiful phenomena I could have imagined. All this beauty started with a single spark within. How could I have done that? Alas, as I marvel at the state of the universe, I begin my quest for such answers. Chapter 1: Cosmos. Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, and others, and welcome to the show. So before I get into anything too serious, I want to talk about a special man in my life. Of course, I'm talking about 19th century Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard divided up life into different spheres of being. The first of which, the one I want to focus on for a second, is called the aesthetic sphere. He believed that aesthetes, those living in the aesthetic sphere, are people who are unattached to inner reflection, ethics, and deeper meaning. Being stuck in here might suck if you're aware of what lies beyond, but it takes a journey through your own thoughts and morality to delve deep into who you really are and to figure out what you mean to yourself and to the world. As we have already seen tonight, our main character has been through an explosion of their own. They have woken up and witnessed the chessboard of life staring back at them. What I have chosen to call the explosion has a slew of different names, but I enjoy the grandiosity of it all. Galaxies, am I right, fellas? The explosion refers to the realization of one's own humanity and existence, the realization that you are you, and that there is meaning to this. The explosion is the realization of consciousness. Personally, I believe that being aware of your presence, current impact, physical space, and inner dialogue is the basis of self-knowledge. One of my favorite quotes of all time is the ever-so-famous line that was written above the entry of the Temple of Apollo located in ancient Greece: "Know thyself." The first step to being able to make complex, moral, ethical, and life-changing decision is self-awareness and self-knowledge. This line is so beautiful to me because it serves as a mantra to follow before you enter a place of great spiritual and higher significance. Know thyself. That is meaningful. If you don't have a grasp on who you are, you will likely have a harder time understanding others or the world around you. What I have learned is that understanding who you are is a very vulnerable experience. Coming to terms with our finite numbers of years on this earth, the clock ticking down to a time we may never know, is a terrifying prospect, but one that is at the center of understanding how you want to spend your life. To understand yourself is to think about your life, meaning you need to include your moments of weakness, despair, and error. Vulnerability is understanding what we have in our lives can be gone at any moment, but there's also the reconciliation with this fact. The joy of living while understanding the precarious nature of human life itself is a balance that takes years to properly master. Another aspect of vulnerability I always find myself toiling with is that although I am human, I am only human. There are limitations that nature, society, and even myself have imposed on me, which I think is quite humbling to think about. I can't do everything at once. Sometimes I have my moments of weakness, other times I'm not in control of my emotions. The idea that I might not have a grasp on my personhood is one that is scary, but I still believe that there is strength in admitting and coming to terms with vulnerability. A method I have found quite effective is in understanding my own vulnerability has been the process of listening to myself. Now you may be asking yourself, what exactly am I listening for? Which I think is a completely valid question. Oftentimes what I've noticed is that people build themselves castles on hills, completely immovable psychological barriers which ultimately are not based in much. As a strong believer in the power of communication, I see the value of stepping out of a comfortable hiding place and reckoning with the challenges of life. When you're used to a quiet, still darkness, the prospect of the explosion is fundamentally destabilizing. Picture a fish in an aquarium. At the sight of something that might destabilize it and make it vulnerable, it hides behind the piece of coral as a means of comfort. What I see as a part of the human experience is to notice the aquarium itself and to recognize that hiding behind false comfort is not what we think it is. Avoiding conversations with yourself only distance you from thinking about things that matter in your state of mind, rather than obfuscating your existential questions. I find that life can be distracting, which, as someone with mental health issues, is sometimes rather convenient because it buys me time away from having conversations with myself. Something I learned in therapy was the process of managing my time. If I can sit on my bed asking myself existential questions for 3 hours, I can put aside 30 minutes to go through a therapeutic checklist as a means to check up on myself. Admitting that you are afraid or uncomfortable is never something to be ashamed of, which is why asking yourself productive questions about your state of mind and actually checking in on your emotions matters so much. As the name of this project entails, emotions will be ever present throughout this project, and dealing with them and embracing them are at the core of my therapeutic and philosophical process. Alright, back to Kierkegaard. According to him, what separates someone existing in the aesthetic sphere and someone living in what he called the ethical sphere is the embrace of ethical teachings and moral standards. This stage is defined by learning and applying what is learned fairly, making decisions that are at times incredibly difficult in the name of justice or fairness. Part of this process involves getting in deep, learning the hard way, and truly waking up from a slumber by way of the explosion, and examining where you go next. The awakening in this scenario is really about recognizing the state around you and within you, including vulnerability, newness, and the decisions that lie ahead. Awareness of the human experience is always difficult and will meet many roadblocks along the way, but it is that process which will help develop a deep sense of virtue and meaning. As we discuss the prospects of discovering and learning, we might want to catch up on our main character's development following the explosion. Gaia. I giggled as I hopped around the multicolor rocks. Sapphires, rubies, emeralds, shining as I skipped from stone to stone. The light bounced off me, following my glowing soul as I danced within the nebula, feeling the weightlessness of joy. Amid my fun, something minuscule caught my attention, like a single marble in a treasure chest. One rock called out to me. I listened to the rock from a distance, as if it were speaking to me. And as I began floating toward it, it only got larger. I felt the vibrations rattling in my ear, sounds I had never heard of. The marble grew to the size of a baseball as I continued towards it. The sounds reached a frequency so high and so deafening that I had to close my eyes and breathe to keep my composure. Once I opened my eyes, everything had changed. I was now the size of a baseball, compared to its current gigantic size. The little stone had become a greenish-blue giant in front of me. I saw wisps of white surrounding it and felt a new sensation. All of a sudden, my comfort began disappearing. The weightlessness I had come to know was gone as I began being pulled into the pretty blue stone. The stars got smaller and smaller as I began my descent. I didn't see a pure blackness, but rather blue darkness dotted with stars. My nostrils filled with hot, humid air for the first time, but it lasted briefly, for I was suddenly fully submerged in warm water. Gasping for air as I made my way back to the surface. Soaking wet, I made my way off the jagged shore and headed inland, listening to the chirping of birds and hissing of other lurking creatures. I brushed past the palm leaves and flowering bushes, staring at the night sky, thinking about where I once came, contemplating my fall into this new land.